2018 was one of the worst years in gaming. Most of you out there might think that's a rather extreme opinion. Look at all the good games we got. Dragon Ball FighterZ, Monster Hunter World, Kingdom Come Deliverance, Far Cry 5, God of War, Octopath Traveler, Spider-Man, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Call of Duty, Black Ops 4, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. That's a list of some of the most popular games of the year. How can you say 2018 was so bad when we got all these games that a lot of people like? If we're being simple-minded, then sure, for a lot of ordinary people, 2018 was a pretty good year if you ignore all the bad games. But there's another side to every success story, a more underground element, one that was obfuscated deliberately. You either never heard about these stories, or you are antagonistic and dismissive of them. Nevertheless, there are people out there who, for them, consider 2018 to be riddled with hostility, secrecy, and frustration. Things kept getting worse, and there appears to be no end in sight, even now. This series of events would become known by a handful of names, mainly in reference to tragedies and purges. But for now, we'll call it the Waifu Apocalypse. Steam is the most popular digital storefront on the PC. Estimates show that around 125 million users exist on the platform, and chances are that's only going to keep increasing. In the world of technology, the PC is more popular now than ever before. Not only do you have countless websites offering a plethora of games that you didn't even know existed, but you also have the chance to experience games lost to the sands of time, abandoned by their creators and never to be seen again. Not only that, but savvy users with the right tools can even restore or remake ideas and content. Is there a game you want to play that's in another language? Don't worry. A team of gamers just like you worked for free and allowed you the chance to play the game in your native tongue. Is there a game you wanted to play but couldn't because it never came out in your country? No problem. Get a VPN or go online and buy the game for yourself. The beauty of the PC is you're given the freedom to exercise your creativity, to speak your mind, and to join communities formed by people like you and me. But what if you were denied that freedom? What if your interests are niche, uncommon, risque, or even dirty? What if your tastes are so unpopular and so widely derided and mocked that the people who rule over you decide to pay attention? These aren't just regular figures of authority or influence. Politicians, lawmakers, CEOs of major tech companies, activists, these figures hold incredible power over everything you can do. And what if they decided that the things you enjoy should not be seen, should not be accessed, or should not even be thought about by anyone? You, sitting behind the screen, are disgusting. You are an insult to public decency and the common man. You are a pervert, just waiting for the opportunity to corrupt and exploit others. We, Big Brother, will tell you what you're allowed to like and to do. There will be no objections, no dissent, no concerns, no questions, no crying, only obedience, only acceptance. This is the kind of treatment you can expect from people if you prefer games that are not for public consumption. And it's where we begin our story for this video. On the 27th of July 2017, an adults-only game called House Party was removed from Steam after a flood of complaints caused Valve to take action. While normally you'd be correct to assume far-left activists were responsible, things played out differently this time. Much like the days of old, the game was attacked by various religious or anti-pornography organizations like NoFap, and an old returning player known as the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, or NCOS for short. 2 days later, House Party returned to Steam after its developers censored the game while providing an option to restore the cut content on their website. In August 2017, Strangers in a Strange Land was banned on Steam until the 4th of December, where the game was reinstated after it was censored. This wave of bans continued on the 25th, where a host of adult games were all banned at once. Those very same games would later come back to Steam on the 11th of November the very next year under different names. No one was really sure why exactly this was happening, but the problems continued. Fittingly, on Halloween, Valve banned the ability for developers to promote content patches that would uncensor the Steam versions of their games. Manga Gamer's PR director John Pickett speculated that the reason for this ban was due to Washington state laws regarding pornography. A VR game called Virtual Reality Girls was banned on the 30th of November 2017, and the final game of that year to be banned was The Key to Home. This particular game, as you'll see, has run into many difficulties, all of which can be attributed to the art style and its protagonists. Valve believes to this day that The Key to Home is a pornographic game designed for pedophiles and is therefore not allowed. But as some of you may know, this kind of accusation is not just uncommon, but very often unfair. 2018 began with a controversy constructed by the media against a game called Gay World. Several outlets demanded that Valve ban this game due to its offensive nature. Luckily, they were unsuccessful this time around, but other games are never quite so lucky. Valve removed a visual novel called Maidens of Michael from Steam, and this was the catalyst that began to spin the rumor mills. Benny Carrillo, writer for Operation Rainfall, published an opinion piece on why this visual novel was taken off Valve's platform. He speculated that the person allegedly responsible did not like lesbian sex, so he went out of his way to get the game banned. He also mentioned the fact the game is set in what appears to be a high school. With everything you now know, you might be thinking things couldn't possibly get worse. You would be wrong. We haven't even scratched the surface. What happened next changed everything, and the effects of this event will be felt for many years to come. On the 18th of May 2018, 10 entire games were simultaneously targeted for removal by Valve. The studios behind the following titles: Honey Pop, Mutiny, Tropical Liquor, Kindred Spirits on the Roof, Battle Girls and Galaxy Girls, Reload 1, Roommates, Kama Sutra, and Sakura Sadist, were all emailed by Valve to be advised that unless they censored their games, they were going to be removed for good. Naturally, targeting well-known developers like Honey Pot did not result in this problem being swept quietly under the rug. The opposite happened. The devs who were targeted spoke out against the sudden rule changes. They brought the issue to light on social media, which caused a massive backlash against Valve. The shitstorm was so big that not only did GOG open up their catalogue for more DRM-free visual novels, but on the 6th of June, almost 3 weeks after the controversy started, Valve recanted their emails and promised they would only ban games that were either illegal or what they considered to be trolling. This in turn caused the media and lots of other people to go absolutely crazy, much to the hilarity of everyone who was not a screeching harpy. The next day, Ancos made a hilarious response, accusing Valve of selling games that not only promote, but cause sexual violence. The founder of alleged digital storefront Itch.io parroted the accusations made by the media, stating that Valve's hands-off approach was both ridiculous and out of touch. Because after all those racist boogeymen were now going to flood Steam with shitty asset flips and promoting hatred, unlike the world has ever seen before. Of course, this was fake news. Such a thing did not actually happen. Asset flipped games still existed on Steam even before the policy change, and these new guidelines weren't going to make the problem worse. However, there was still cause for concern. Valve's guidelines were still somewhat vague. What is considered illegal? What is considered trolling? Because Valve never answered these questions, it was still a guessing game to some extent. This vagueness ended up causing the developers for the Deep Space Waifu franchise to self-censor the lolly-oriented Flat Justice as a precaution. Of course, this was only temporary, and they changed their minds soon after. In the meantime, Valve began to work on their content filter system to allow users to see whatever games they might be interested in buying. Things looked like they were going to be alright. This was a win-win situation for everyone, technically. This was supposed to be a golden age for niche games, free to explore a wide variety of ideas and express them without fear of censorship. Slowly but surely, adult games began to show up on the Steam storefront. People would buy the games, and others would ignore them. Everything seemed to be going well, and it seemed even small Japanese studios began to notice this shift in the market, and they too followed suit, putting their previously untenable games up for sale. The complaints from before seemed to not matter anymore. They died off as soon as they realized they held no power over anyone. And so, there was peace. The war on waifus seemed to be over. However, the first signs of trouble began to spring up. A game called Gay Nation, under Valve's new policy guidelines, was banned from Steam on the 5th of August 2018. Valve said the game was trolling. Of course, much like before, the developer for the game spoke out against the ban and urged for a conversation about the nature of censorship. While the topic would indeed be a worthy discussion, his words unfortunately fell on deaf ears for the wider gaming community, only really causing concern for the gamers who are very strongly anti-censorship. We now had our first victim from Valve's new policies. Meanwhile, an old friend of ours decided they weren't out of the game yet. A new game called Negligee Love Stories came out on the 16th of December 2018, and immediately, Encos jumped down the throats of Valve and demanded they censor games like Negligee. They believe these games contribute to the culture of sexual objectification of women, and that this is unacceptable in the Me Too era. But their attack on the game was pointless. Valve wasn't going to ban it, and even if they did, it was already banned in 28 countries, including Japan and Australia. Aside from these two incidents, Valve continued to work on and eventually fully implement their new filter. The games were selling, and gamers were happy. But not all stories have a happy ending. All it takes is one loose thread to unravel everything. And on the 9th of November, we knew something was about to go horribly wrong. Do you remember The Key to Home? They should probably rename the game to The Key to the Waifu Apocalypse, because 1 year after attempting to put the game on Steam, they were blocked again, and yet again they were accused of sexually exploiting children for pedophiles. At around the same time, another game called The Last Girl was also banned for containing underage girls. This was despite the fact the girls' ages weren't listed anywhere. However, unlike last time, Hentacol Dojin, the developers who created The Key to Home, decided to share some details about the situation. We learnt two things. 1. Hentacol Dojin submitted their game to the ESRB and they came back with a teen rating, meaning the game is suitable for those 13 and older. There is no sexual content present in the game whatsoever. And 2. We finally obtained some evidence of a lone wolf operating within Valve that may have been the cause for the waifu apocalypse. Hentacol Dojin revealed they were in contact with a female employee who reviews games for submission. So there we have it, right? We had a lead to follow, and possibly a resolution in sight. Unfortunately, things only got worse. An RPG called Mau Mau Discovery Team was banned from Steam shortly after it came out, and you could now only buy the game through a specific URL link instead of through the storefront. Mau Mau Discovery Team featured lolly characters doing some questionable activities, and though Valve gave no reason, it was likely removed because of that. The next game on this list has been at the receiving end of a number of unfortunate events, and it's a visual novel called Emolicious. Emolicious is an adult visual novel based on taboo subjects like incest, and all of the characters, despite looking like high school students, were officially 18 years old or above. On the 15th of November, Valve banned the game due to what they perceived to be child exploitation. The creators of the game, Yume Creations, have at last given us another piece of the puzzle regarding this recent wave of bans. They shared an email from Valve's software product release manager, Jason Ryman. Jason Ryman is one of the two individuals directly responsible for continuing the waifu apocalypse. He was originally known to us due to his direct involvement in banning Gay Nation, a game we mentioned earlier. So what did his email say? We wanted to let you know that we will not be shipping your title Emolicious on Steam. While we will generally ship most things on Steam, we still will not ship titles that exploit children. This was completely new to us. We were originally told the only games that would be banned were either illegal or trolling, so where did this new rule come from? Or hell, was this what they meant by illegal games? How does that make sense? Regardless, problems continued to appear out of nowhere, as Yume Creations' new game was also banned from Mikandi and Newtaku. Unlike Valve, the reason for the game being barred from release was directly due to its nature as a story about incest. But if that wasn't enough, the Steam account Yume Creations used was banned for no apparent reason. Honestly, at this point, you can't help but feel bad for the developers. Alongside this news, however, we learned something else. Jason Ryman was not alone. If you recall, Hentacol Dojin was in contact with a woman when their game was banned. And now, thanks to Yume Creations, we got her name. Both Arissa and Jason, at long last, have been identified as the main culprits behind the removal of adult video games from Steam, which is in direct contradiction to Valve's previous statements. In a conference, Valve made it a point to say they were not the taste police back in July of 2018, but apparently, at some point down the line they changed their minds. Eventually, Immalicious was officially released on Faku without any censorship whatsoever, and the following day their Steam account was restored. A week later, another game was banned from Steam, and once again the reason given was child exploitation. The first episode of Cross Love, a game featuring cross-dressing, also contained characters who are above the age of 18. And if you thought the pornography in these games was the reason for their removal, you'd be wrong. The all-ages version of Hello Goodbye was also removed from Steam, and this game was set in a military academy. The devs addressed the problem a few days later and would be selling their game on alternative platforms. At around the same time, two things happened. First was the fact a game called Niflheim's Hunter was already supposed to be released on Steam, but Valve had given the title the silent treatment and would let it sit there for at least another week. But what was interesting was the developers of Crosslove, Top Hat Studios, announced they will no longer release uncensored versions of their games on Steam due to their censorship policies. And it appears that, finally, Valve was going to address the resurgence of censorship on their platform. But not before they continued to act as if nothing was wrong. The team behind Niflheim's Hunter were ordered by Valve to remove the lolly character from their game, or else they would not be allowed to release their game on the store at all. This was very strange, because the Steam release wasn't going to have any hentai scenes in its initial release. As soon as we found out about this, yet another game was banned from Steam. My Bullied Bride is a visual novel about your depressed and gloomy wife eventually opening up and overcoming her past traumas. The game makes it pretty obvious it's about adults, but once again, that didn't stop Valve. Valve's actions have been shown to be very biased and unfair, and it seems Top Hat Studios agrees with this. On the 16th of November 2018, the studio announced their very own digital storefront where uncensored adults-only games would be allowed to be sold. I talked to the person in charge of their Twitter account to confirm if this meant featuring lolly characters would be allowed, and they confirmed two things to me: that the games would be DRM free, and that unfortunately they will not allow lolicon games for the foreseeable future. They want to play it safe for the time being until they are absolutely certain they can fight any legal disputes over the content they sell. On the same day of this announcement, an artist working for Valve named Jane Ung opened up an inquiry into the recent wave of censorship of games on Steam, and she actually found the answer we've been looking for. It turns out the reason we're seeing all these games either getting banned, threatened with a ban, or given the silent treatment is because Valve's actual official policy does not allow games that, quote, contains content that exploits children in any way. In addition, it's been speculated that games featuring lolly characters and schools or academies in any way will also be targeted and highly scrutinized during the review process, which would explain why games featuring adults and no actual pornographic content were still getting banned. It sounds ridiculous, right? What do they mean by exploitation in this context? And why is the guideline so vague that Valve can ban literally any game they want if it features what they believe to be exploitation? Well, it turns out the answer would be what Manga Gamer talked about in 2017, Washington state laws, specifically regarding the legal definition of obscenity. The reality is Valve is being careful with the kind of games they're allowing on their platform so that they can avoid getting into any legal troubles. But this creates more questions than answers. Why are these games being banned but others aren't? There are plenty of games that feature child exploitation and various school settings. Hell, there's even a game called High School Romance that you can buy right now. So why are the rules being applied so inconsistently? Unfortunately, the answer is because Jason Ryman and Arissa don't like these games. Their biases were especially clear around Christmas time as My Erotic Summer and a VR game called Sexy Girls were delayed indefinitely thanks to Valve. But a yaoi visual novel called Sweet Pool was not only allowed on Steam, but it also received a patch to restore its adult content without any issue. Sweet Pool is no ordinary visual novel either. The game is extremely dark and features violent homosexual relationships, cannibalism, child abuse, gore, self-harm, sexual assault, cults, and mental illness. And to top it all off, it's set in a high school. None of these themes and events require the 18+ patch. 2019 continued to see delays and bans for games, none of which were given a reason as to why. The aforementioned My Erotic Summer, Moe Reversi, Hentai School Life, and D20 Sweet Roll Club were all banned from Steam. The all-ages version of Food Girls was delayed, and the sequel to Immolicious was cancelled because the devs weren't able to make any money from their first game, all thanks to Valve killing any chance they had to make money off their work. The only good news so far was Niflheim's Hunter was finally allowed to release on Steam after what Valve described was a misunderstanding. Not long after I finalized writing this script, another game was banned from Steam. But out of all the games I mentioned, this one is the most important. The game is called Ayuda Crisis. In a rather uncharacteristic move, one of Valve's employees provided the following statement. Regardless of a developer's intentions with their product, we will not distribute content that appears, in our judgment, to trade in the prurient representation or exploitation of minors. While every product submitted is unique, if your product features this representation, even in a subtle way that could be defined as a grey area, it will be rejected by Steam. We are not interested in working with partners that dance around the edges of what's legal. For instance, setting your game in a high school setting but declaring your characters are of legal age would fall into that category and be banned. And that's the new official stance. The developers and gamers who speculated that games can be banned due to high school settings and certain character designs were all correct. Valve made it clear early on they'll ban games they consider to be illegal, and it seems they're using both obscenity and anti-free speech laws to justify this. Is it consistently applied? No, but Valve doesn't care about that, even though on the off chance they get sued, they could actually win. But the discussion over the legality of fictional porn is not the main point of this video, so I'll leave a video by Louis Laveau in the description below if you want to learn more about that. But how did things spiral out of control so drastically? What caused Valve to start the waifu apocalypse, and why is Washington state law so important? What's the missing link?
There was a time, ladies and gentlemen, in America where children had access to pornography. High school, college kids were getting it day in, day out, more and more. Married men were having a steady diet of it. And the result was child sex abuse, child pornography, addiction, divorce. It all sounds like what is happening today, but what I'm talking about is 30 years ago with the advent of the VCR and the videotape. So what we're trying to do is act together with 85 organizations and not take all the credit for ourselves, and we tell those groups, please, if you go back a couple slides of that letter, please work together to get these laws enforced and to get people educated. We got almost half the United States Senate and 75 members of the House to sign a letter to the Attorney General saying pornography is causing great harm. It's leading to sexual trafficking, et cetera, addiction. And we know that you're not enforcing the law.
In 1962, a grassroots Christian activist movement known as Operation Yorkville was established. Their objective at the time, and even to this day, is to completely abolish any and all pornography. Back in the day, members of Operation Yorkville organized letter-writing campaigns and handed out stickers to people with the phrase, "Save your children" written on them, which is a very common emotional talking point for religious activists. As their influence and list of targets grew, they eventually renamed themselves into the more familiar Morality and Media, and then became known as ENCO sometime during the turn of the 21st century. Their board of directors consists of 17 people, including Haley Halverson, Vice President Dawn Hawkins, and CEO Patrick Truman. One of the founders of Operation Yorkville was Father Morton Hill, a Jesuit priest who held considerable political power. He worked with 3 different presidents in his lifetime: Lyndon B. Johnson, Richard Nixon, and Ronald Reagan. His goal was to combat pornography and introduce, and more importantly, enforce, legislation for the vaguely defined obscenity exception in the United States Constitution. Their most recent political endorsement came from then-Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney in 2012, which Truman took full advantage of at the time. You can tell based on their history that this organization is very authoritarian in nature. Patrick Truman was a former prosecutor during the Reagan and Bush administrations. His primary agenda is to abolish pornography entirely, and he wants to achieve this by enforcing obscenity laws in the United States.
So we began this project a year ago called the War on Illegal Pornography. It is illegal to put obscene hardcore pornography on the internet. Well, what is the internet? It's virtually all obscene pornography. What the Supreme Court says is that if it's just waist-up nudity, it can't be obscene. But anything more than that, virtually anything more than that, can be prosecuted. But right now, it's also a violation of federal law to distribute hardcore pornography on cable or satellite television. Yet, whatever your cable company has, they have channels. It's all illegal. One prosecution of any one of those, and they'd all stop. It's a violation of federal law to distribute hardcore pornography in hotels and motels. One prosecution anywhere in the country, and that would stop. It's a violation just of federal law, 5 years in prison, just to be in the business of selling pornography. See, what is illegal is determined by community standards.
He was the former director of an anti-abortion organization called Americans United for Life, and eventually became chief of the Child Exploitation and Obscenity section in the Criminal Division for the Department of Justice. Prior to becoming involved with morality and media, the chairman at the time contacted Truman for assistance in combating porn on the internet, because they were literally getting nowhere, and this is how he ended up where he is today. He has made a lot of absurd claims, such as citing anti-porn researcher Neil Malamuth, and that he actually believes millions of Americans watch child porn on a regular basis.
When we used to, at the Justice Department, prosecute child pornographers, we were prosecuting pedophiles. Today, the profile of that individual is often a parent, sometimes a grandparent, many times it's a college student. And why is that? It's because there's no distinction in the mind of these people. It's pornography, they enjoy it, child, adult, whatever. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll never solve the child pornography problem in America unless you're willing to prosecute adult pornography. Mm-hmm. It's the brain science. Men don't start with child pornography, pedophiles do. But most men who are involved with child pornography are not pedophiles. They didn't start out as a pedophile. They looked at the adult pornography on the internet. Their brain demanded more, harder, deviant material, and some then go to child pornography. Dr. Sharon Cooper described what was going on here. Just not that she was part of that case, but she described that to children, viewing pornography is different than it is for an adult. She says that children actually believe they're experiencing what they're seeing. And so when she described this incident, she pointed out that many of these kids believe they've been there before, virtually, not actually. They may not have raped before, but they've seen so many rapes. They've seen so much sexual violence that it's a small step to commit sexual violence. Many parents think, my kids are different than the neighbor's kids. Yeah, but your kids play with the neighbor's kids, and they get pornography there. You know, my kids, I've given them the sex talk, so they're not likely to do that. Yeah, you gave them the sex talk, and Hollywood gives them the sex talk every day. Who do you think is winning?
But despite his ridiculous arguments, he was an effective prosecutor at the time, causing many pornographers to go out of business and even sent some of them to jail. This legislative and political power Encos possesses is very important to keep in mind when trying to understand this story. If Manga Gamer is correct in saying Valve is concerned about obscenity laws in the United States, then this right-wing Christian group is one of those worries. After all, you only have to take a look at their website to find articles written by their members to see they've been attacking Valve for a while. For example, Steam made it on their personal shit list. They published an annual article for what they call the Dirty Dozen list, which says the following: no corporation should profit from or facilitate sexual exploitation. Something you should keep in mind is that Patrick and his cohorts restructured the organization in a variety of ways, but the main points of interest are the name of his organization and his political rhetoric. The name Morality and Media these days is a quick and easy way to signal to society that you're an authoritarian. They changed their name to the National Center on Sexual Exploitation to not only give them more credibility, but also allows them to obfuscate their real agenda, banning porn.
What I want to encourage people to do is to learn to hate pornography. Yes, you can learn to hate pornography. Read Thomas à Kempis, How temptation sneaks in and how to stop it at the beginning. But prayer and fasting are the keys to this, I would say. Catholics have two other weapons that are so vitally important, and that is the Eucharist and confession. Those who frequently receive the body of Christ keep their own body pure. And listen to this advice from Pope Pius XII in the encyclical, The Mystical Body of Christ, regarding confession, frequent confession. He says that perverse moral habits are uprooted. The conscience is purified. The will is fortified. Salutary self-control is obtained, and an increase in grace is secured by the very fact that the sacrament is received. That's a recipe for success in the internet age. And here's what parents can do to protect their family. You have to lock up the home. I mean, every single internet-related device should have a prohibition from her own. I never left the fight, because the fight wasn't just about abortion. The fight is really a fight against the sexual revolution. You know, that's a nice name, revolution. But what is the sexual revolution? The sexual revolution is a spiritual insurrection against Almighty God. That's what that sexual revolution is. And abortion is part of it, but pornography is part of it as well. And same-sex marriage, it's, you know, the anything goes attitude of the spiritual insurrection, so-called sexual revolution, is really what we're fighting. And if in your family life or in your church and in your community, you're only fighting against one of these things and not all three, to put it in military terms, you're being outflanked and you'll lose the war. But pornography has been essential to this victory that those promoting the sexual revolution have had in our society. Pornography is indispensable. You know that Larry Flint of Hustler and Hugh Hefner of Playboy and these pornographers sold America from the 50s on that the notion that pornography is an emblem of freedom, something to be celebrated in our society. But what we have seen well in the internet age is that pornography is not an emblem of freedom. It's really more of an agent of destruction that is enslaving people to this, what our Catholic Church calls in the Catechism, a grave sin.
Their rhetoric is important because some people initially believed ENCODES was a Democrat-funded feminist group. But in actuality, ENCODES co-opted left-wing narratives and buzzwords in order to legitimize their beliefs in the modern age.
So the harm is so great that people are waking up to it. When I deal on Capitol Hill, as I often do, you even have the liberals on Capitol Hill, like Senator Dianne Feinstein, couldn't get any more liberal than her from San Francisco, opposing pornography, working with us and others as well. So much of what those kids are looking at today, or what you would look at, if you went on the internet and just began searching for pornography, what you would find is so much sex mixed with violence, and it's violence against women. Pornography is reinforcing this societal notion, that you're all aware of, that girls must be sexualized. Look at the images in magazines, movies of girls. They're all sexualized, but pornography is reinforcing that. And you're seeing it in the popular stars that kids like, Miley Cyrus, Paris Hilton. These people are no different than porn stars, and that's what our kids are seeing. It was about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little longer, the American Psychological Association Task Force studying young girls said that within a 10-year period of time, girls are changing their self-image. And it's not enough to be a straight-A student or a good athlete or just a good person. If they're not sexy, then they believe they don't measure up. And they call that phenomenon sexual self-objectification. And this is a very dangerous trend for girls, that they think they have to be sexy or give themselves sexually in order to be something. The one feminist that I deal with a lot is Dr. Gail Dines of Wheelock University. I agree with her on nothing but this. And she made a statement recently at a presentation that I was at. She said that for girls today, the choice is to be hypersexual or to be invisible. And no 14-year-old girl wants to be invisible. And the effects on boys are even more profound. Boys are gaining a sense of entitlement. They think they're entitled to see every girl in their class, every movie star, naked and in a sexual pose, because they can go on the internet and get any star, virtually any star, and get a website that shows they're all collected there, and they think the same of their kids. And boys, therefore, are developing a predatory personality, and they're asking the girls to do things that you and I never would have thought of that would even be possible.
So what else did Encos do? How else are they attacking Steam? Not only do they target individual games like House Party, Mass Effect Andromeda, The Men of Yoshiwara, and Melty's Quest, but they also write quite a few hit pieces on Steam and even some of their critics. Back when the Waifu Apocalypse first began, everyone on their board of directors made it a point to celebrate their victory, and Halverson went out of her way to call everyone who criticized them trollbots. After all, why would anyone actually disagree with them? They also wrote an article back when Valve announced they would allow adult games on Steam. Not only did they admit to being behind campaigns to get games banned from the platform, they also used the Me Too movement as a justification for censoring what they believed to be sexually violent and exploitative games. Organizations like Encos make you wonder whether or not the 80s and 90s ever truly ended.
But the hearing wasn't just about violence in general. Panelists took the industry to task for its portrayal of violence against women, and claimed that female video game characters were frequently portrayed as victims or sex objects, and sometimes both.
Obviously, it would not pass our guidelines. This game, which as you've indicated, promotes violence against women, simply has no place in our society.
Video games that allow young players to participate in heinous acts of cruelty, misogyny, and inhumanity should not be portrayed regardless of profits.
He also noted that many games featured scenarios in which women were kidnapped. He pointed out that sometimes men were kidnapped too, but they were never rescued by women. But no one hit this point home quite as hard as Marilyn Draws. She talked about video games as an exciting new technology, one that if done responsibly, could actually prepare kids for the 21st century. She claimed that in the early days of video games, boys and girls played them with equal interest, but that as games became more geared toward boys, girls missed out.
Girls are being trained in dressing Barbie dolls, and boys are being trained in technology. This has to change. As a mother, as a parent, as a woman, and as an American citizen, I'm stating this needs to be changed.
She noted that very few female video game characters had much control or power. Not long after the senators watched footage from Night Trap, Draws looked around the packed room and asked a question.
I mean, how would you like to have a teenage daughter go out on a date with someone who's just watched or played 3 hours of that game?
I want to bring to your attention the following arguments Encos put forward to justify their actions. 1. 35 million Steam users are children, and 2. Video games are training simulators for sexual assault. Let's begin with the easy one to debunk, that there are 35 million Steam users under the age of 18. They've thrown this number around quite often, whether it's in tweets or in articles on their website, but they never once linked their source for this number, so where did it come from? It came from a combination of two sources, Steam's user base and a report by the Entertainment Software Association. Over 125 million people are on Steam, with the average user being 38 years old. The ESA found 28% of people who play games are under the age of 18. Encos then applied that 28% to 125 million and got 35 million. If you're thinking that sounds dishonest, that's because it is. Valve and the ESA are two completely different organizations, and to conflate one report with the other is nothing more than a political tactic to win ideological debates. You have to ask yourself a lot of questions when you see this argument being made. First off, how can you say 28% of Steam users are under 18 when you're allowed to create more than one account, or even share one account with multiple people? How can you combine the Steam stats and the ESA report when they measure completely different things in completely different ways? How do you know all 35 million of these children are exposed to the exact same games on the Steam storefront when not only are parents able to control their kids' account settings, which you wrote an article about by the way, but also to organize your account preferences so that you'll always be shown the games you're interested in? How can you extrapolate 28% and apply that to 125 million people when the ESA report measured gaming console ownership and not Steam account ownership? How do you know, therefore, that Valve is deliberately going out of its way to expose children to adult-oriented video games when a simple explanation would be their algorithms are just showing users more games similar to the ones they either searched for or purchased? Their most important argument to pick apart would be the following. Do video games teach men how to sexually objectify and assault women? Encos believes they do. They went as far as to say these games are sexual assault training. But the problem lies in how they tackle the question. They skip over the fact we're talking about video games and attack them as if they're pornography. They do this because it's easy for them to make their point after they redefine words and give themselves more wiggle room to push their agenda and win arguments. When they were attacking House Party, Encos criticized Valve's age gate for adult games. They, along with the official NoFap Twitter account, believe because the verification process is not difficult to bypass, Steam is complicit in advertising rape simulators to children.
Yes, this is what America is about. This is what our community is about. We love this stuff. Everybody's doing it.
In addition, Encos also criticized the mobile app for Steam, saying that specific app gives children unlimited access to porn on their phones. I want you to think about that for a minute. So what does the academic literature say about video games in this context? Much like violence, the evidence suggests that no, video games do not cause sexism, sexual violence, nor any other sex-related problem. Even the effects of pornography are not clearly defined in this area. For instance, a 2009 study by Ferguson and Hartley found an inverse relationship between pornography consumption and sexual assault. In other words, the more porn we have, the lower the crime rate. If this sounds familiar, it's because studies found the exact same thing with video games and violent crime. But for groups like Encos, that doesn't settle the issue. They would insist that video games cause a change in behavior. I'm going to do a much more in-depth video on this another day, but this belief generally stems from the Bobo doll experiment in 1963 by Bandura and his cohorts. Many anti-media activists have misinterpreted the results of this study. The actual conclusion of Bandura's studies, in simple terms, state that virtual behavior can be imitated in real life. This means watching a fitness video would be a suitable example, but you don't see anyone go after Richard Simmons, nor try to get the WWE banned from TV. But nowadays, when you explain the lack of evidence regarding behavior, people turn around and say they cause a change in attitudes and beliefs, which then causes the change in behavior. It's a very slimy workaround, and you need to be careful whenever someone tries to convince you this is true. Luckily, there are studies out there that directly counter such weasel word tactics, so let me share with you what I found. In one of my favourite studies of all time, Brewer, Coet, Festel and Quant concluded their longitudinal study on the effect video games have on sexist attitudes by saying they found no correlation between sexist video games and the development of sexist attitudes. Beck and Rose in 2018 found not only did the experimental and control groups have low levels of rape myth acceptance, which basically means you believe women enjoy or deserve rape, but that the group that played games with sexually objectified female characters had an even lower level of rape myth acceptance, or RMA, after playing the game. Fernandez de Henestroza and Melzer found similar results. When they tested players for RMA levels, they also found a decrease in RMA after playing a sexually violent video game. This was consistent regardless of whether or not the participants played a sexualized or non-sexualized female character. Kuhn et al., that's K-U-H-N by the way, in 2017 conducted a longitudinal study investigating whether or not video games had an effect on a large range of things, such as impulsivity, depression, anxiety, empathy and interpersonal competencies, and even sexist attitudes. Just like every other violent video game study that's worth its salt, they found nothing. And lastly in 2018, Reed, Lynch and Matthews found that playing as a sexy female character lowered RMA and hostile sexism, and that the same sexy avatar had no effect on self-objectification. In other words, sexy female characters did not affect body image. All sources in this video will be linked in the description. No one can say for certain how long this apocalypse will last. People would prefer it to end sooner rather than later. Others choose to ignore it or deliberately hide it from others. Some people only spoke out against this censorship when Valve didn't explain themselves, but then went back to criticizing Valve as soon as they did something they disagreed with. I'm not even sure if they're aware of what happened after June 2018. This entire shit show only happened because the games in question are not just for adults, but they adopt the anime art style which powerful people in Western countries associate with children. Of course, if you tell them about Game of Thrones, which features incest and the sexual grooming of a 13-year-old girl with a 40-year-old husband, they'll fall back on the free speech argument. Unless you vote these dinosaurs out of office and stop giving money to people who hate you, this hypocrisy will only die when they themselves die. And even then, you'll never know when their beliefs will resurface in future generations. And that's where we are. The future of gaming is in a delicate position right now, being attacked from all sides for various reasons. And the worst part is, we're not even done talking about this. Valve will continue to do what they're doing with little resistance, but another company out there is interested in following their footsteps. Many of us never expected them to act the way they are, but they do it nonetheless. This conversation we're having will resume another day. But until then, all you have to do is pay attention.